lived in Elkhart, and we moved to a house out on Goshen Avenue, and Fred Wright was my neighbor. And him and I really got a liking to one another. So I started full-time at 18. I more or less started as a laborer. I don't know if I was a good laborer or not, but he didn't fire me. That was lucky. We built that bank in the dead of winter, and it was many, many days. It was below zero, and one day, I swear it was 10 below, and we're out there laying block at 10 below zero. You do know that mortar freezes, don't you? Anyway, I put a lot of antifreeze in that mortar, and it froze. But you know, I always figured that the next day when it warmed up, it would thaw out. And it did. It thawed out and it worked out okay. The only thing I got caught on was when we laid the stone at Delaware Fieldstone, and we had it all covered up, and we had heaters in there, but one night the heat went out. And it just so happens, of all the nights the architect would go over there and make an inspection, that was his night. And he caught us with no heat. So the following day, we had to tear out all the stone that we laid that day. And we had to redo it. So from then on, we tried to keep the heat on at all times. When I got out of school, 56, we went over to, the first job that I remember working on was a job for Skyline Corporation, and Fred Wright bid against one other contractor, and this contractor was Frank Feit's brother-in-law, and he was low bidder on this job. And we built it in probably 5 months, and when we got all done with it, final payment was made, and Fred Wright walked over there and gave our DCO a check for $10,000. And our DCO couldn't believe it. And he told Fred, he said, well, you're my contractor. I'm going to start expanding United States wide, and you got every job. And boy, I couldn't believe the amount of Skyline jobs we got from then on. We were traveling all over the United States, and me included, and a few other guys. It wasn't me, it was a bunch of guys, because there was about 60 plants we built, I believe. Grace Lutheran Church was probably built in 1958 or early 59, and it was Indiana limestone. Before we could use this stone, we had to face it. When it come, it had to be perfectly square. So all stone on this building is perfectly square, everything. It had to be where the masons couldn't lay it because it'd stick out of the wall, you know, too far.
You remember how long that took you to do all that?
At least 6 months. It was a long time because that was a big job.
So you were cutting stone every day for 6 months for that entire church building?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
But so many heads. I mean, I'd love to have a count of how many heads that I cut. But I got fairly good at it, but naturally after working 6 months. Yeah. I don't know, there's another one here that had a large steeple, and no one had the nerve to ride a crane up to set that steeple, except for Fred Wright. Fred Wright straddled that ball and he held on to that cross, and he went up there. The only thing that's holding that thing now is him sitting in it with his crotch over this ball. And, of course, he's holding on to the cable, naturally. And he went up there and he set that doggone thing, and that was in the Elkhart Truth, him doing that because of the owner, you know, of a construction company taking on that job that no one else would do. He couldn't find anyone else to do that job.
So he did it himself.
Did it himself, yeah. How he went in there and sold those churches, I don't know. But I remember stories that he set up on that stage with the congregation out there and told about his expertise in churches. And when he got up from that chair, he was awarded the job. No bidding. That's negotiated. But I bet he got a good half a dozen, 8, maybe 6, 7, 8 jobs, big churches. And they're all big jobs.
And they're all still there.
And still beautiful.
Yeah, they're all still there.
Yeah. Yeah, they will be there forever.
How did you get the NIPCO account?
NIPCO was very friendly with Ross Martin. Somehow Ross Martin, he was a founder. He started a little plant there in NIPCO making brass fittings. NIPCO, that big plant there on Simpson and Middlebury, I worked down there as a mason foreman, and it worked out real good because the job was so big that they saved all the interior block work for winter. So at that time, was lucky we had winter work for a whole crew of masons and me, and I was the only laborer. I tended all the masons myself. So I'd stay there nights and stock up all the block, all the scaffold, so that when the next day come, all I had to do was make some order and keep those guys busy because I had the block there, and all they had to do was lay. After the first phase was built, I got a phone call, and he says, "Ron, stop what you're doing. Upper echelon has decided that plan is way too small, and we need you to double the size." I said, "Oh my God." I said, I got all the foundations and plumbing in for the office. I'm ready to pour the slab." He says, "Well, tear it out." So I had one farmer that worked for us as a carpenter, and he says, "You don't have any dynamite, do you?" I said, "Oh, yeah." He says, "I use dynamite all the time, blowing out stumps." I says, "Go get it." I says, we're gonna blow out all these pads, every one of them." And we exploded every pad in that whole new addition. Blew it out. Now that's not allowed now. This was just outside of town.
How'd it happen you started taking guys fishing?
We took 6 people, and we had a pickup truck, and we had a framework over it, and we covered it with a tarp, and put a longwood bench in there, and put our gear underneath the bench, and we took 2-hour shifts of driving because we drove around the clock. Ely, that is a very special place. We went back in.
That was Ely, Minnesota.
Ely, Minnesota, and we called ahead and had them pack up all our gear for 1 week, so we didn't go shopping. They knew, how to do it. We didn't tell them what to do. But rented 1 motor and 3 canoes, and the motor then pulled all the other boats, so you didn't have to row, because we had to make numerous portages. The lakes were several miles long, and a massive amount of lakes. Have you ever seen a picture of all these lakes? I mean, they go this way, but you had to make sure that you hit the right one or you're going to get lost, you know? So we had to hit the right one and go for the portage. We had to, I think one of them we had to carry that boat for 2 miles at least to the next lake, and then you went on and on and on and on. But it was a lot of fun. And once we got back there, we caught a lot of northern walleye, and then we had walleye for breakfast, noon, and supper.
Well, Fred and Ron played hard, not wild, but hard, and always wanted to go on fishing trips or hunting trips or just out and about like that. And we went on 2 or 3 trips to Alaska together and a couple trips to Canada. We were planning a bear hunting trip to Kamchatka. And I had bought a brand new rifle, big, strong Weatherby with a scope, and had come down for the Christmas present. We were going to leave the next spring. During the Christmas party, Fred Wright stands up and says, was giving out presents and things like that to all the different employees, stood up and said, and I have to tell Jack that we're canceling the trip to Kamchatka. Okay. Nobody else knew what we were talking about except Ron and Fred and I. And so we went over and I talked to him. I said, Fred, what's going wrong? What's going on? And he said, well, I just decided that it's probably a little too much for me and I don't want to go. I said, okay. And he said, and I'm the slowest one in the group and I won't be able to outrun you two if the bear comes after us. And Ron then said, that's okay, you can just shoot Jack in the leg. They were great guys, worked hard, had a lot of fun together.
Fred Wright got bored down there. He was building a couple houses just to keep his hands in it. So he said, why don't you start a construction company up? He said, I need some help. He said, I can't do that by myself. He said, I need an estimator. One estimator, I think we can do it. So we sent him Joe Pressler.
I worked with Ron Edmond up in Indiana, and basically he was my estimating boss. So that's who I was working under. And when I came down here, I was working hand in hand with Fred Wright, and basically trying to start up a business. And
he packed up, headed out. That was a big day, him going down there. And we were so proud of him. But when Fred laid out the ground rules, he says, there's only one condition, Ron. He says, you gotta follow him.
So our first job I think we acquired was a project, interior improvement project, a renovation for Edison College for a library with Jim Slusher. And I believe Fred Wright at the time was kind of acting superintendent, like project manager on it for the first job.
We were snowbirds, we were tourist contractors. It was tough, real tough, getting work and then finding help. There's no union halls down there to call from. So we were a union contractor up in Indiana.
But it was extremely hard to get jobs because we were from out of town and we weren't the good old boy. And the good old boys, they knew how to bid. They said, well, that Wright Construction, give him another $30,000 onto his bid. And believe me, they did. They really umped it. But then one of the jobs that we did, we decided that, well, we're going to fool them. We're going to cut 100,000 or maybe 200. We cut a lot. Anyway, we lost a ton of money on that job. But we got their attention, and from then on, they bid us because they knew that we was here to stay. We bid 2 jobs at the same time, the big one, the high school, and the middle school. We built them both at the same time. We had them under construction at the same time. And I think the superintendent quit. So Fred just got out of college, just got married, and I said, I got a little job for you, Fred. You're going to go over and take care of this job.
Dad sent me over to West Palm to be an on-site project manager for a middle school. I mean, I'm 22 years old and he puts me on 130,000 square foot middle school. I'd never built anything in my life. And I go to build an entire middle school out of town with a bunch of drug addict staff members as my assistants.
And as soon as he got jobs started over there, the electrician went belly up, the plumbing contractor went belly up, and the HVAC contractor went belly up.
I remember coming home in the evening after we were married and sitting on the edge of our bed with my face cupped in my hands, feeling like I was going to have a nervous breakdown, and I was probably 22 or 23 years old at the time. And my wife had to think, what in the world did I get myself into? So that was a rough job. But at the same time, I mean, I look back, and one of the best ways you learn is through difficult times. And so if there's one thing I got out of that project was a really hard and fast education on the construction industry.
I wrestled in school and stuff, and I told Fred, you know, I could put you down. I don't know what brought it up, but I told him I could put you in the ground in about 2 seconds. He says, no way. He says, yeah, about 2 seconds.
Well, first, Kenny Oaks, he might have, I guess technically he did beat me. He probably remembers it slightly different than I do. I thought I gave him a pretty good match.
At the time, I was big and strong, and he was skinny and young.
But the guy's like twice as big as I am. He's a mountain.
He says, no way. And he stuck his hands up like this, and about a second and a half later, he was on the ground.
I probably was not in my right mind for agreeing to wrestle him anyway. But I thought I gave him a pretty good round. I do remember eating a lot of dirt, though.
We had some work with Wright Construction. I had Sunshine Elementary School and here in Fort Myers. And I had a job in Orlando and one in Boston and one in the Keys. So I went to the bank because in order to be able to finance and fund that work, you're going to need a line of credit. I went to the bank and I said, I need a line of credit for $50,000. Here's my contracts. You know, here's a what do you think? They said, you get the contracts and we'll give you the line of credit. I said, okay. I go to the bank and I walk in the bank and I said, hey, here's the contracts, they're signed, we're ready to go. I need to get this line of credit set up. And the banker looks at me and goes, we can't give you that $50,000 line of credit that you're asking for. I said, excuse me? He said, we just can't do it. And I said, well, if you can't give me $50,000, how much can you give me? And he said, nothing, you were denied, the board denied you your loan. So I drive to Wright Construction, I walk in and Fred Wright's there. And I'd known Fred for a couple of years. And I walked into Fred's office, I said, Fred, I really have to apologize. I'm very, very, very sorry, but I can't do Sunshine Elementary School. I'll help you find somebody to do it. My line of credit was denied. I'm so sorry, but I'll help whatever I can do to find you somebody else to do this contract. He looks at me a little bit, he looks at me a little closer, and he says, sit here for a second. I think he's going in to get Ronnie Edmond. I think he's going to go in to Ronnie Edmond and bring him in and tell him the story. He comes back and Fred hands me a check for $50,000 and said, here's your retention, don't let me down. I was in business. 3 years later, we were named the 131st largest mechanical contractor in the United States by domestic engineering. And without Fred, it never would have happened. I'd be working for somebody else, I wouldn't have my companies, And that's my story. And I've told that story 100 times because it says a lot about the people, the company, and the philosophy inside that amazing company.
I was the kind of guy that loved getting up in the morning and going to work. I had no bad days. I loved going to work. I absolutely loved it. And I would, Joni, pack my lunch every day so I could sit right there and eat my lunch. I didn't want to go out and eat. But I was in love with construction. Just loved it. And I didn't want to leave it. I loved getting up in the morning and going to work. And I tell you, there's few guys that can really say that.
So at what point did you start thinking then that you wanted to start backing away?
Probably when I got 60 years old. Naturally, I wanted my son to take over because I wanted to retire, and I wouldn't know what to have done if Fred hadn't taken it over. I'd probably still be working, you know, because I wasn't about to close it up. And thank God I went home and I slept so good at night, knowing that my son's going to take over this job. Boy, I felt good.
Well, there's a big difference between understanding how to build a building and running a construction company. It's two very different things. So I had no problem building anything that you would throw at me. But once you gave me the company, then I was really over my head.
Yeah. I was in here a while.
You were? Yeah. After you made me president, you were here for?
A few years, wasn't I?
Oh, at least 5 or 6 after that.